three gods in the Old Testament made God do something he had never done before. Not send a plague, not a flood, not fire from heaven. He simply left. These three ancient gods did not attack Israel from the outside. They infiltrated from within, turned worship into a literal business transaction. One gave God a wife he never asked for. Archaeologists actually found the terrifying proof, and one required parents to burn their own children alive while deafening drums drowned out the screams. This is the horrifying story of Baal, Molech, and Asherah, the three gods that made the Creator entirely abandon his own people. And by the end of this, you will never look at the story of the Israelites the exact same way again. When Joshua led Israel across the Jordan River around 1400 BC, they entered a world they had never lived in. For 40 years in the barren wilderness, every single need was met by God directly. Manna appeared every morning, water flowed from rock. Their clothes simply did not wear out. Not one of them had ever planted a seed and waited for rain. Then they crossed into the land of Canaan, and the manna permanently stopped. The day after they ate from the land, it ceased. For the first time in an entire generation, Israel faced a terrifying question that would define absolutely everything that followed. What if the rains do not come? There is one crucial detail about Canaan and its religious system that almost nobody talks about. And this hidden detail explains everything. The gods of Canaan were not spiritual beings. They were completely economic. Baal offered rain. Asherah offered children and fertile wombs. The entire system was heavily transactional. Perform the ritual, and the god delivers the result. Religion functioned exactly like an insurance policy. The premiums were paid in grain, in flesh, and in blood. Israel did not just walk into ancient superstition. They walked into a highly developed economic theology that had been running perfectly for centuries. And they did not immediately abandon Yahweh to embrace it. The book of Judges records that Israel served Yahweh and the Baal simultaneously. They kept the sacred feasts, they maintained the holy priesthood, and then, just in case, they maintained the local altars. They kept these shrines on the hilltops. The logic sounded perfectly reasonable to people who had never farmed and were absolutely terrified of drought. But it was spiritually catastrophic. What followed was a vicious cycle that repeated 7 different times. Faith, then compromise, then idolatry, then oppression, then rescue, and then faith again. Each rotation pulled them much deeper. What began as a simple roadside altar on a hilltop would not stop there. It never does. It moved inward, slowly and generationally. It kept moving until one day it was inside the sacred temple itself. The first god is the one the Bible mentions by name more than any other foreign deity, over 90 times across the Hebrew scriptures. His name means simply Lord or Master. And in the ancient world of Canaan, that specific title belonged to the storm. Baal, specifically Baal-Hadad, was the rider of clouds. He was the commander of lightning, the god who split the sky open and sent the rain that made everything grow. In a fragile agricultural economy where a single failed rainy season could mean mass starvation, Baal was not a religious curiosity. He was an economic system. Worshipping Baal was the ancient prosperity gospel. Perform the right rituals and the rain will come. Maintain the right shrines and your crops will produce. Your family will eat. For centuries, this system operated purely at the folk level. Small shrines, local priests, and hilltop altars scattered across the countryside. Troubling, persistent, and condemned repeatedly by the prophets. But then in 874 BC, something shifted, and it changed absolutely everything. King Ahab of Israel married Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Sidon. This was not just a political alliance that happened to include a minor religious complication. This was a full religious revolution that used a political marriage as its vehicle. Jezebel arrived not as a queen quietly maintaining her private faith. She arrived as an aggressive missionary. She brought with her 450 prophets of Baal. She also brought 400 prophets of Asherah, all of them funded directly from the royal treasury. She commissioned the massive construction of a temple to Baal in Samaria, the capital city, and she began the systematic execution of the prophets of Yahweh. For the first time in the history of Israel, Baal worship was not a local folk practice tolerated on the margins. It was strict government policy. It had state funding, royal protection, and an institutional clergy. The playing field had not just tilted, it had completely inverted. Into this terrifying moment stepped one man, a prophet from Tishbe in Gilead, a man about whom the text offers almost no background, no genealogy, no origin story, and no title. Just a name, Elijah, and a bold declaration. There would be no rain in Israel except at his word. 3.5 years slowly passed. The drought Elijah announced was not a minor agricultural setback. It was a civilization-level crisis. Crops were dead, livestock were dying everywhere. The streams had completely dried up. And every single day of that brutal drought was a public argument against Baal, the rain god who could not send rain, the prosperity god who had delivered absolutely nothing. Then Elijah finally called for the confrontation. When they met on Mount Carmel, the terms were very simple. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices. The God who answers with literal fire is the real God. 1 lonely prophet against 450. What followed was not a cheap magic contest. It was a public bankruptcy hearing against a totally false deity. The prophets of Baal cried out from morning until noon. They leaped wildly around the altar. They cut themselves with swords and lances until blood ran down their arms. They prophesied in a total frenzy until the evening sacrifice, and the sky remained completely silent. Then Elijah repaired the broken altar of Yahweh with 12 stones, 1 for each tribe of a nation that had fractured itself by chasing other gods. He dug a deep trench around it. He had heavy jars of water poured over the sacrifice until it ran down and completely filled the trench. And he prayed 1 single prayer, measured and direct, exactly 33 words in the Hebrew. The fire fell. It instantly consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench. The terrified people fell on their faces. The 450 prophets of Baal were seized, and that same evening, the rain returned. The utter silence of Baal had become a final verdict. But here is what makes that exact verdict so devastating to read in retrospect. Within 1 single generation, Baal worship fully returned to Israel. The altars were rebuilt. The shrines were restored. The archaeological record confirms Baal worship persisting in Israel for another entire century after Carmel. No thunder from heaven reversed it. No miracle sustained the momentum. Over and over, Israel actively chose the transaction over the relationship, the insurance policy over the covenant. They chose the visible altar over the invisible God. Baal was loud. Baal was public. Baal operated in the open on the hilltops under the sky. The second deity was very different. Her name was Asherah, and she did not attack from the hilltop. She quietly entered the home. Asherah was the mother goddess of the Canaanite world, the goddess of fertility, of sexuality, of the sea, and of life itself. Where Baal was thunder and spectacle, Asherah was quiet, subtle, and entirely domestic. She was represented by wooden poles or stylized trees planted beside altars, carved into household objects, shaped into small clay figurines that archaeologists have found by the thousands across Israelite homes. And not just Canaanite ones. Her imagery echoed something ancient and deeply human. The tree of life, the nurturing mother, the ultimate source of living things. Baal operated in the open. Asherah entered the home, and that crucial distinction made her the more dangerous of the two. The book of Jeremiah captures her worship perfectly, describes a single scene that is striking precisely because of how ordinary it appears. Chapter 7, verse 18. The children gather the wood. The fathers kindle the fire. The women knead dough to make sweet cakes for the Queen of Heaven. The entire family is working together. Children gathering wood as they would for any household task. Fathers lighting fires as they would on any ordinary morning. Mothers in the kitchen shaping the pagan offerings with their own hands. This was not a fringe practice. It was not carried out by rebels in the dark. This was domestic religion woven into the daily rhythms of family life. Children grew up watching it. They absorbed it as perfectly normal before they were old enough to question it. They passed it to their own children without a second thought, the exact way every generation passes on what it has always known. When scholars excavate Iron Age Israelite homes, they find small terracotta figurines of a woman holding her breasts. These figurines are almost certainly associated with Asherah worship. They find them not in temples, not in sacred sites, but in kitchens, in storage rooms, in the dark corners of ordinary houses. This was a faith that had stopped being a choice. It had become a total assumption. In 1975, archaeologists were excavating a site called Kuntilat Ajrud in the northern Sinai. It was a remote desert way station dating to approximately 800 BC. They discovered shocking inscriptions on large ceramic storage jars. Among them was a phrase that scholars have been aggressively debating ever since. Written in ancient Hebrew by Israelites was this exact phrase, "I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah." His Asherah, Yahweh and his Asherah. This was written not by Canaanites, not by pagans who had never known the God of Israel. It was written by Israelites who had simply over time grafted the mother goddess into their understanding of God himself. Generation by generation, household by household. In their minds, Asherah was not a rival to Yahweh. She was his literal wife, the goddess responsible for conception, for safe delivery, and for the cry of a newborn in the night. Where Yahweh governed the heavens in the sacred covenant, Asherah governed the womb. They believed they had not abandoned him. They thought they had completed him. They had given the God of Israel a consort, softened his edges, domesticated his jealousy, and made him much more comfortable to live with. They did not just commit idolatry. They committed literal identity theft against the Almighty. But the most disturbing moment in the entire history of Asherah worship in Israel does not come from an archaeological site in the Sinai. It comes from a single verse in the second book of Kings, chapter 21, verse 7. King Manasseh, who ruled Judah for 55 years, placed a carved image of Asherah inside the Holy of Holies. He had the longest reign of any king in the Davidic line. To understand what that truly means, you have to understand that room. The Holy of Holies was not simply the most important room in the temple, it was the most sacred physical coordinate on earth. No furniture filled it except one object. The Ark of the Covenant, overlaid with pure gold and crowned by the mercy seat, was flanked by two golden cherubim whose wings stretched toward each other across the space where God and his presence was understood to rest. This was not symbolic. This was the literal dwelling place of the living God on earth, the place where heaven touched ground. No one entered it, not the king, not the priests, not the Levites. Only one man held the right of entry, the high priest, and he entered only once a year on the Day of Atonement. After days of intense ritual purification, he carried blood and incense, moving in prescribed sequence. He knew that a single deviation from the order, a single procedural error, an unconfessed sin, or an impure thought could mean he would never walk back out. The bells on the hem of his garment were not decoration. They were a vital signal to the priest waiting outside. As long as the bells rang, he was still alive. That room, that specific, terrifying room. Manasseh placed the carved image of Asherah inside it, and it stood there for 55 years. For 55 years, every high priest who entered on the Day of Atonement approached the mercy seat with a Canaanite fertility idol, standing in the exact same room. The most sacred space in the world was shared between the God of Israel and a goddess. The goddess Israel had decided was his wife. For 55 years, God shared his room with a total lie. And here is what makes that silence so completely devastating. God did not strike Manasseh down on the day the idol was carried in. He did not split the temple in two. He did not send fire. The building stood. The priesthood continued. The sacrifices were offered. The feasts were observed. From the outside, the religion of Israel looked perfectly intact. But something had shifted in that room. It was a shift that no ceremony could paper over and no ritual could repair. The presence had been treated as a roommate rather than a sovereign. The holy had been asked to coexist with the profane, and it had been asked not once, not by a foreign invader, not by accident, but by the king of the very people of God deliberately for more than half a century. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something very important about the hidden truth of these ancient gods. If you want to finally uncover how this dark history connects to the exact world we live in today, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Baal promised prosperity. He promised that your crops would grow and your family would eat. Asherah promised deep comfort. She promised fertility, protection, and a God who was vastly easier to live with than the one in the text. Everyone around you was doing it. Your neighbors, your children, your king. The government endorsed it. The priests tolerated it. Would you have been the one to say no? Be completely honest. Tell me in the comments, because what comes next is the darkest chapter in this entire story. And it happened precisely because not enough people said no early enough. For 55 years, a pagan idol stood in the sacred room of God. And for 55 years, it seemed like absolutely no one cared. But there was one person who had not been born yet. And when he finally read what God had actually said, he wept. He violently tore his clothes and wept. He was 26 years old, and he had been king since he was 8. His name was Josiah. In 621 BC, the high priest Hilkiah was overseeing major repairs to the temple. Repairs to a building that had been so neglected under decades of idolatrous kings that the book of the law had been completely lost somewhere inside it. It was buried under rubble and disuse. When Hilkiah found the scroll and had it read to the young king, Josiah reacted. His response was immediate and deeply physical. He tore his robes. He wept openly. He sent immediately to inquire of God because he understood something terrifying. Perhaps for the first time, he saw the massive distance between what God had required and what Israel had become. To understand how extraordinary Josiah was, you have to understand who surrounded him. His grandfather was Manasseh, the king who placed the idol in the Holy of Holies, the king who shed so much innocent blood that it filled Jerusalem from one end to the other. His father was Amon, a king so corrupt and so widely despised that his own servants assassinated him after just 2 years on the throne. Josiah grew up inside a dark lineage of catastrophic spiritual failure. And yet when he encountered the actual words of God, something broke open. All of that history had not been able to suppress it. What followed was the most comprehensive religious reform in the recorded history of Israel. Josiah removed and burned the AsherahPole from the temple. He demolished the houses of the male cult prostitutes. These houses stood within the temple complex itself. He defiled the Topheth, the horrific site of child sacrifice in the valley of Hinnom, so that absolutely no one could use it again. He tore down the high places that Solomon himself had built for foreign gods centuries earlier. He destroyed altars from one end of the land to the other. 2 Kings records its final verdict very plainly. Before him there was no king like him who turned to Yahweh with all his heart and with all his soul. He turned with all his might according to all the law of Moses. Then in 609 BC, at the age of 39, Josiah rode out to intercept Pharaoh Necho at the valley of Megiddo. He was tragically killed by an archer. His lifeless body was brought back to Jerusalem in a chariot. The entire nation mourned. His son Jehoahaz lasted 3 months before being violently deposed by Egypt. The next king reversed absolutely everything. Within 23 years of the death of Josiah, every altar had been rebuilt. Every high place had been completely restored. The Topheth, which Josiah had defiled, was fully operational again. The greatest revival in the history of Israel lasted less than a single generation. And now, with every restraint totally removed, the third god claimed his payment. His name was Molech, and his currency was not grain. It was not oil. It was not song. It was pure flesh. His name is derived from the same Semitic root as the Hebrew word for king. Milcom, or Malcolm, was the deity of Ammon. This was the nation east of the Jordan. But his worship had spread west into Phoenicia and deep into Canaan. And unlike Baal, who wanted rain rituals, and unlike Asherah, who wanted cakes and wooden poles, Molech had a very different currency entirely. Not grain, not oil, not song. Flesh. The most innocent flesh available. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 21 states the strict prohibition directly. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. The prohibition exists purely because the practice existed. God does not prohibit what absolutely no one is doing. The first Israelite king documented performing child sacrifice to Molech was not a pagan king. He was not a foreign ruler. It was Ahaz, a descendant of David. Man sitting on the throne of the covenant line of God. 2 Chronicles 28 verse 3 records that he burned his sons in the valley of the son of Hinnom. A king on the throne of God, from the chosen dynasty of God, sacrificed his own children. He sacrificed them to a foreign god of fire. The site where this occurred lay just outside the southern wall of Jerusalem. The valley was called Gehenna, the Valley of Hinnom, and within it was a specific, terrifying installation called the Topheth. The word Toph means drum. The Topheth was the place of the drums. Those drums you heard at the beginning of this video, now you know exactly what they were for. They were not ceremonial. They were not musical. They were built to drown out the sounds. They drowned out the sounds that would come from the blazing fire. Not the crackling of wood, not the roar of the flames. The sounds the parents could not bear to hear and could not be allowed to hear. Because if they heard them, they might actually stop. The drums were mercy, a terrible, devastating mercy. Imagine a father who has walked this dark road. He carried his son on his shoulders when the boy was small. He heard that boy laugh. He watched him sleep, and now he walks into the valley. He walks because the priest has told him that this is the ultimate price. This is the heavy cost of protection. This is the insurance policy that Baal could not guarantee and that Asherah could not secure. The ultimate transaction, the ultimate premium, and the drums begin. The dead silence that follows that moment is the only honest response to it. This was not temporary insanity. That is the most disturbing truth of all. It was calculated investment. It was the terrible logic of a people who had been heavily trained across generations. They were trained to think of religion as a pure transaction. They had been told that the gods demanded heavy payment, and they had followed that logic to its most grotesque conclusion without ever stopping to ask whether the logic itself was completely wrong. The prophet Jeremiah records the response of God to the Topheth in terms that are unlike almost anything else in the prophetic literature. In chapter 32, verse 35, God speaks of the child sacrifices in the valley of Hinnom. He says, "I did not command them, nor did it enter into my mind that they should do this abomination." Not anger in the first instance, grief, total incomprehension. The God of Israel framing the practice as something so alien to his nature that he cannot find it, cannot find within himself the origin of the idea. It did not enter his mind. He did not conceive of it. He did not ask for it. And he had watched it happen in the valley just outside the city he had chosen as his own. No nation arrives at Molech without first passing through Baal. That line is worth sitting with. The transaction that began with a hilltop altar and a simple rain ritual had over centuries and generations followed its own dark logic. It led straight to a valley of burning children. The economic theology of Canaan had compounded its interest until it claimed the one thing no investment should ever touch. After the Babylonian exile, the Valley of Hinnom was never restored. It was not rebuilt, not reclaimed, not repurposed for agriculture or habitation. It became instead what its dark history had made it, a place of perpetual waste and fire. The refuse of Jerusalem was dumped there. The fires never fully went out. Worms and decay fed on what the flames did not completely consume. Smoke rose from it constantly, became the open wound of the city that would not close. Jeremiah had already declared its new name. Chapter 19, verse 6. God says it will no longer be called Topheth or the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. It will be called the Valley of Slaughter. In Greek, the name Gehenna became one single word, Gehenna. In the New Testament, the word Gehenna appears 12 times. 11 of those 12 appearances come directly from the lips of Jesus of Nazareth. In Mark 9:48, he describes it perfectly. He describes it as the place where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. He used it as his primary term for the place of final judgment. He used a word that every single person in his audience could instantly identify. They had grown up in Jerusalem. They knew the dark valley to the south. Some of them had smelled the bitter smoke. Jesus was not speaking abstractly. He was pointing at a real geography his listeners could see and smell. They had walked past it their entire lives. And he was saying that place, that valley, that wound in the earth that your ancestors filled with the worst thing they ever did. That is the exact image I want you to hold when you think about what it means to be finally permanently separated from God. The literal valley where Israel committed its worst sin became the word the Son of God chose for eternal judgment. That is not a coincidence. Baal completely corrupted the economics of a nation. He replaced the covenant relationship with a commercial transaction. He convinced an entire people that God was a vendor, not a loving father. Asherah corrupted the identity of God. She was introduced quietly, domestically, and generationally. She stayed until he had been reshaped into something more manageable and much more willing to share his throne. Molech corrupted humanity itself. He took the transaction Baal had normalized and followed it to its absolute end. And once a nation has burned its own children, there is nothing it will not do. There is no line remaining. There is no bottom left to reach. Prophet Ezekiel, writing from Babylon after the fall of Jerusalem, watches the glory of Yahweh. The visible, luminous presence that had inhabited the temple since the days of Solomon begins to move. It rises from the cherubim above the sacred ark, moves to the threshold and pauses there, the way a presence lingers at the edge of a place it loves before it leaves. Then it slowly moves east. It rests above the Mount of Olives, looking back at Jerusalem one final time, and then it is gone. No thunder, no earthquake, no declaration, just complete absence. The most devastating judgment God ever rendered on Israel was not a plague or an army. It was his departure. The temple stood for another few years. Then the massive army of Nebuchadnezzar came, and when they burned the building to the ground, they were burning a structure that had already been vacated. These three entities did not retire when Babylon fell. They simply adapted. They shed the names and kept the architecture. Baal lives wherever faith is reduced to transaction. He lives wherever prosperity is treated as evidence of divine favor, and the relationship is replaced by ritual. Asherah lives wherever God is quietly reshaped to fit human comfort. Wherever the parts of Scripture that demand holiness are set aside in favor of a God who affirms everything, and requires absolutely nothing. Molech lives wherever innocence is sacrificed for security, for convenience, and for the logic of necessity. Not always in fire, not always in a literal valley, but the underlying structure is exactly the same. Something precious offered up on the altar of what we tell ourselves we cannot live without. The names changed, but the altars did not. 570 years after the glory departed, a man stood on that exact same mountain. He came from Galilee. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey while crowds spread cloaks on the road. And when he reached the place where the Mount of Olives looked out over the city, he stopped. The same eastern vantage point where the glory had rested one final time. He stopped and he wept. Luke records it plainly in chapter 19. It was not a diplomatic expression of concern. The Greek word is highly specific. He wailed. The glory that had departed came back with a human face, human hands, and human tears. It came back to the same mountain, looked at the exact same city, and instead of leaving in silence, it wept. The God who walked away finally walked back. The drums have stopped. The valley is silent now. Which of these three gods, Baal, Asherah, or Molech, do you believe is the greatest threat to this generation? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below because I read absolutely every single one. If this video opens something deep inside of you, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. There is so much more coming that you will not want to miss.